Hey everyone, and welcome back to Learn English Easy, the show where we make learning feel like a chat with friends. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Sam. And we promise, no what I quizzes. Unless Jamie sneaks one in.
It was one time.
Yeah.
And you aced it.
Right.
So, how's your day been, Sam? Actually useful, or did you finally file that new geopolitical risk report you were wrestling with? I heard it was color-coded using 6 different shades of doom.
Let's just say my cocky is working harder than I am trying to explain why the current security architecture of Europe is a paradox wrapped in a massive headache. Oh. Can we get to the topic before the complexity wears off? This deep dive is, it's absolutely crucial.
Absolutely, because we are diving deep into some seriously significant geopolitical shifts today, and the stakes just couldn't be higher for the European continent.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at sources covering the current state of the conflict in Ukraine, and when you look at the calendar, we are roughly at day 1,416 of the full-scale invasion.
Day 1,416, that's nearly 4 years. It's hard to even say that out loud.
It really is. 4 years of constant, brutal conflict.
And this is such a watershed moment because the focus is shifting, and shifting dramatically. For the first 3 years, it felt like the world was focused almost exclusively on the battlefield.
Right. Who was gaining what territory, what new weapon system was in play.
Exactly. Now, as the sources we're looking at clearly show, the entire conversation has moved. It's in the diplomatic and strategic realm now.
Okay.
We just saw the Paris summit a few days ago, and the focus is moving from, battlefield victory to standing on the line once the shooting finally stops.
That's a huge change in thinking.
It's a complete, and I have to say, a very risky repositioning of the entire European defense posture.
Okay, so our mission today is clear. We are taking all this complex, high-stakes information from military movements to these intense diplomatic negotiations and just, boiling it down for you.
Yeah.
We're going to tackle this in 2 major segments that really define the current reality. First, we need to grapple with the reality of this so-called frozen front line. And crucially, why a formal peace treaty feels like, a ghost in the distance, probably years away.
And then we pivot to the absolute hottest debate in global politics right now.
Yeah.
This urgent discussion within NATO and the wider EU about sending European monitoring forces,
The
MFU, into Western Ukraine. This is where Europe tries to build its own security guarantee, and this is where the risk factor just spikes dramatically.
Right up to the level of potential global escalation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to it and unpack this paradox of a stagnating war and, accelerating diplomacy.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this. When people look at the map of Ukraine on the news, they often see the line, and it just barely seems to be moving. So is this war actually frozen?
That's the word everyone's using.
Right. And the metrics, they certainly suggest a stunning lack of major movement compared to, that initial invasion phase.
Oh, absolutely.
We have a data point that really drives this home, compiled by the Institute for the Study of War. It suggests that Russia gained only about 74 square miles of territory in the last month.
74 square miles. To put that figure into a stark military perspective, that's less than the territory captured by some major tank divisions in a single day during World War II.
Wow.
It's a staggering data point because it represents the total breakdown of Russian offensive doctrine.
Right. To put that 74 square miles into a relatable perspective, for those of us who don't live by military maps, it's roughly half the size of the city of Philadelphia.
Half of Philly.
After 4 years, we are dealing with these minimal, grinding, localized gains that barely even register on a strategic level.
Yeah.
So, purely geographically, the definition of a stalemate seems accurate. The map looks frozen.
It absolutely does, but that is the danger here. We have to clarify the terminology. Calling it frozen is a dangerous misnomer, and the sources repeatedly warn against using that term.
Okay, why?
While the front line's position is stagnant, calling it frozen suggests a cessation of fighting. Like the conflict is iced over, quiet, and dormant.
And it's not.
It is anything but. It is, as the sources clearly indicate, an attrition meat grinder.
A meat grinder, yeah. That's a powerful image.
The minimal territorial gain hides the brutal, constant day-to-day expenditure of human life and material. It is a slow, costly, highly kinetic war that just happens to be stuck in place.
So frozen in terms of movement, but boiling in intensity.
Exactly.
And when you look at the human cost versus the territorial gain, that paradox becomes truly shocking. It's It's hard to rationalize the continuation of this conflict based on traditional military objectives.
The numbers are frankly difficult to comprehend, and they are why that meat grinder analogy sticks.
What are we talking about?
The sources state that Russia has lost over 790,000 personnel, and that's counting killed or injured since 2022.
790,000.
And Ukraine's estimated losses are around 400,000.
Wow. So we are talking about well over 1 million casualties on both sides for a line that, as you just pointed out, has essentially stabilized.
Over 1 million people lost to maintain a line that hasn't substantially moved in 2 years.
That's a monumental human tragedy that points to a military operation completely disconnected from its original political goal, which was, regime change and swift occupation.
And that disconnect is precisely why both sides are locked into this pattern. Neither side can achieve decisive victory, but neither side can afford the political consequence of defeat.
Right.
To stop the fighting now, under the current conditions, would be for Ukraine to validate Russia's bloody efforts, and for Russia to admit that 790,000 casualties yielded next to nothing.
It almost makes the whole exercise seem irrational from a strictly military cost-benefit perspective.
It does.
If the military gain is so small, why is a formal peace treaty so hard to sign? Why do they keep throwing hundreds of thousands of people into the grinder for half a city block?
This is where we have to move from the battlefield analysis to a higher level of strategic thinking. Okay.
Analysts suggest that both sides have effectively abandoned short-term military objectives in favor of a deep, long-term survival strategy.
A survival strategy.
Yeah. They are playing for what is called System 2 gains. It's a term from cognitive psychology, but it's being applied here to geopolitical planning.
I remember this term. System 1 is that fast, emotional, reactive thinking, like grabbing a specific town for a victory parade.
Exactly.
And System 2 is slow, logical, and deliberate. So what does System 2 look like in this war?
System 2 is about future survivability and industrial capacity. For Russia, it means fighting defensively while using any pause to rapidly reconstitute its industrial military base.
To rebuild their factories.
Right. They are signing contracts now for drone production facilities and new tank armor that won't be fully operational until 2028.
So it's not about capturing Avdiivka today. It's about making sure they can produce 1,000 drones a month in 4 years' time. Precisely. So nobody is fighting for the headline tomorrow. They're fighting for the geopolitical map 5 years from now, specifically by building up their deep strike, long-range capabilities.
Okay, that makes sense.
And for Ukraine, this System 2 thinking means that accepting a peace treaty that simply freezes the current line without any security guarantees is viewed as a total strategic disaster.
A disaster. Why?
They see it as a ticking time bomb that is set to detonate the moment Russia completes its industrial rebuild.
And if they sign a treaty today, essentially validating the land Russia currently holds, what's stopping Russia from using the 2 years immediately after the signing to, say, fully rebuild its tank and drone fleets and then just attacking again once they're ready?
Nothing stops them, in Ukraine's view. That fear that Russia will use the pause as a strategic reset button is the single greatest barrier to a formal peace agreement today. Ukraine looks at the numbers and sees that Russia is exhausted now, but given a 3-year pause to restructure their supply chains, recruit new cohorts, and implement sanctions-proof manufacturing, well, they will be far more dangerous in 2028.
So for Kyiv, the goal is not merely to stop the fighting.
No. It is to prevent the next war by ensuring Russia never gets that strategic breathing room. They need permanent security.
That makes the timeline for a formal signed peace document look extremely distant.
It is.
If the goal is not stopping the fighting but securing the future, then the political gap is, well, it's unbridgeable right now.
It is. When analysts discuss a formal peace document, a piece of paper where both presidents sign and agree on final borders and disarmament, they are now saying that might not arrive until 2028 or even 2029.
2028 or 2029. Why so specific?
Because that is the estimated date by which both sides' current military industrial capacities are projected to reach a point of maximal financial and material exhaustion, regardless of any external aid. That's a long time to sustain this level of political hostility and military tension, even if the violence reduces.
So what are we looking at between now and 2029? If the intensity is boiling down due to exhaustion, but the politics aren't resolving, what is that phase called? It sounds like a state of limbo.
The sources suggest we are looking at a waning of the war rather than a clean conclusion.
A waning.
The intensity drops because the economic exhaustion on both sides finally becomes overwhelming. This phase is characterized by a massive shift in military procurement
How so?
from offensive assets like heavy armor and infantry carriers toward defensive assets like air defense systems, fortified bunker lines, and long-range precision fires to hold static positions.
That's a fascinating insight. The transition from offense-focused spending to defense-focused spending essentially marks the recognition that victory is impossible.
Exactly. The waning phase means less large-scale offensive action, maybe more limited strikes designed to drain the opponent. But the core political dispute, who owns that 74 square miles, remains completely unresolved.
So Russia can't afford a breakthrough, and Ukraine can't afford to stop defending.
Right. The war doesn't end with the signature. It ends when both treasuries and equipment stockpiles are too depleted to launch major movements. It stalls out.
It just grinds to a halt.
That's the reality of the waning phase. However, for that waning to stabilize into a durable freeze, a massive external factor has to come into play.
Which is?
Someone needs to guarantee that the freeze stays frozen. Because if the line stops moving, but everyone knows Russia is rebuilding and planning for 2028, that's not peace. That's just a timeout before the next, potentially even larger, attack.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the Ukrainian population seems to understand this strategic nuance too.
They do?
I saw some surprising public opinion data cited in the sources. Polling showed that 72% of Ukrainians would approve of freezing the front lines.
A huge no.
If it came with ironclad security guarantees to it.
Right.
If they didn't have to formally give away the land to Russia.
That 72% figure is the foundation of the diplomatic push we're seeing now. It's a stunning example of a population choosing long-term stability and non-recognition over short-term violent action.
It really is.
It tells the world that the political will exists to stop the violence, but only if the core national red line, the recognition of lost territory, is preserved.
They can live with the facts on the ground, but not the legal change.
Exactly. They are willing to accept the reality of the de facto borders, the current line of control, but never the de jure status, the legal recognition of the transfer of territory.
And that takes us straight to the models that analysts are citing. The Cypriot model or the Korean model. Wait, isn't the Cypriot model basically admitting that this is a failed negotiation strategy that just freezes instability? Why is Europe aiming for a failure model?
That's a necessary point of friction.
Yeah.
It is a failure model in the sense that it doesn't solve the core dispute. But it is a success model in the sense that it stops the dying. We are borrowing concepts from decades-old conflicts that were never fully resolved, but managed to prevent the recurrence of mass violence.
So the mechanism is simple.
Very. You stop fighting where the soldiers stand, a clear, delineated ceasefire line.
And the crucial part is what happens next.
Yes. The crucial part is that you never formally recognize that the land now occupied by the adversary belongs to them. You maintain your legal and sovereign claim over that territory indefinitely.
So the war never technically ends.
In the Korean context, they have an armistice, not a peace treaty. The war is technically ongoing, but the massive violence stopped in 1953, backed by a significant foreign troop presence.
So like in Cyprus, where there's a green line patrolled by the UN, or Korea, where the war technically never ended, but the shooting stopped decades ago.
That's the idea.
The division exists, the violence is contained, but the political and legal claim of the original state remains intact.
Exactly. This is the condition needed for the freeze to stay frozen without triggering domestic political collapse in Kyiv. It removes that ticking time bomb aspect by maintaining legal pressure on Russia while stopping the attrition.
But there's a huge if there.
A huge one. It only works if those ironclad security guarantees are real, tangible, and ready to escalate if Russia violates the line.
But formalizing non-peace sounds like formalizing permanent regional instability. Isn't that a massive defeat for Europe's stated goal of a secure, whole, and free Ukraine?
It is.
It implies that Europe must now indefinitely babysit the line.
It is an admission that full victory, meaning the return of all 100% of Ukrainian territory, is unattainable in the near future without unacceptable levels of risk.
So the goal shifts.
The goal shifts from maximal victory to maximal stability, and that necessity is why Europe has had to scramble to invent an entirely new security mechanism.
Because NATO's not an option.
Because NATO membership, the ultimate security guarantee that could back a Korean-style armistice, is simply not on the table today, as Article 5 cannot be extended to a country actively at war.
So, if the battlefield is frozen in place, the only way forward must be diplomatic. And that takes us directly to the MFU, the only credible replacement for NATO membership that Europe has devised.
Exactly.
That sets the stage perfectly. If the durable freeze requires security guarantees and NATO membership is still currently off the table,
Which it is.
due to the political impossibilities of admitting a country at war, what replaces it? Because the absence of a guarantee is, for Ukraine, the guarantee of a future attack.
What replaces it is the concept of risk redistribution and commitment by individual nations. It's a dramatic shift.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
This idea that NATO as a collective entity is constrained, but individual willing members are not. This is the coalition of the willing concept, and it is the most significant diplomatic shift of the last year.
It's an admission that the old structures can't handle the new reality.
It is. It's basically Europe saying, we can't wait for all 32 members, especially the ones far away from the border, to agree, so we'll just pull together the heavy hitters and do it ourselves under a separate flag.
An end run around the process.
That's the strategic calculus. Since NATO as a whole is bound by the requirement for consensus and the extreme fear of invoking Article 5 direct confrontation with Russia, individual members are stepping up.
And providing boots on the ground.
Yes, but in a strictly non-combat, non-NATO mandated role. This is an end run around the political paralysis of the alliance. It allows countries like France and the UK, who feel the most acute responsibility for European security, to act decisively.
Let's detail the origin of this plan then. This wasn't just diplomatic chatter. This came from a high-level meeting, the recent Paris summit.
That's right.
Key players involved were Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK and President Emmanuel Macron of France, who signed a declaration of intent directly with President Zelensky.
They're the architects?
And they are the architects of this new structure, which they call the Multinational Force for Ukraine, the MFU.
The significance of the UK and France taking the lead here really cannot be overstated.
Why is that?
These are two of Europe's primary military powers, both nuclear powers, committing to a level of involvement previously considered way too dangerous. It signals that Europe is taking the reins of its own defense posture, regardless of U.S. commitment.
But the devil is in the details, and the sheer scale of the plan, combined with its strictly non-combat role, is why this is causing such a massive red line reaction across the continent.
It is.
What are we actually talking about in terms of numbers? This isn't a token force.
Not at all. The sources indicate the plan calls for sending a substantial force between 10,000 and 30,000 European soldiers.
10 to 30,000.
Yeah. If you put that into context, that is a significant expeditionary force, larger than what many European nations contribute to UN peacekeeping operations globally. This is an army designed to hold a ceasefire, not just a small team of observers.
10,000 to 30,000 non-Ukrainian European soldiers deployed on Ukrainian soil. That is huge. And what is their condition and role? Are they there to fight? What happens if the ceasefire breaks?
The deployment is explicitly conditional. It happens after a ceasefire is reached.
Okay, that's important.
Their job is not combat. Their role is defined as monitoring and deterrence. They are there to watch, document, and crucially act as a deterrent by their very presence.
So they are the human embodiment of that security guarantee Ukraine needs to accept the Cypriot model of non-peace.
That's it. They are the boots on the ground that transform the Cypriot model from a political theory into a physical reality. They are the referees making sure Russia adheres to the waning of the war conditions.
And if Russia mobilizes a new division or tests the line, the MFU is supposed to immediately report, document, and, I guess more importantly, absorb the risk.
Precisely. If Russia were to violate the terms of the ceasefire, say, by suddenly moving tanks out of storage or remobilizing drone units aggressively near the line, the MFU would be there to document it, confirming the breach to the world.
But their real function is that risk absorption.
Yes. Their potential presence in the line of fire escalates the political cost of any Russian action exponentially, forcing Moscow to consider the consequences of killing a French or British citizen.
We mentioned this is causing a massive split. It's not unified support across Europe.
Not even close.
This is not a simple East versus West disagreement. It's a deep rift over risk tolerance and strategic vision. Let's look at the breakdown because it tells us everything about how different countries view this.
This split table is the clearest indicator of the underlying geopolitical anxieties in Europe. It shows that Europe is still not unified on how to handle a direct confrontation with Russia.
Let's start with Group 1, leading the charge. That's the UK and France. What is their argument for taking such a massive risk, particularly when the US is sitting this part out?
Their position is rooted in the belief that deterrence must have teeth. They argue that a non-binding declaration or a piece of paper signed in Paris is meaningless unless someone is physically there to verify compliance and bear the immediate consequences of a violation.
So words aren't enough.
No. For France, there is a historical imperative for strategic autonomy, and for the UK, there's a long-standing desire to project power globally and maintain influence in European security.
So for London and Paris, risk avoidance now simply guarantees a larger conflict later. They see this as an investment in stability, even if it's a terrifying one.
Exactly. They calculate that waiting for 2028 when Russia has fully rebuilt is the greater risk. Deploying the MFU today as a tripwire is the only way to genuinely stop the bleeding and force the waning phase to stabilize.
So they're willing to accept the immediate risk.
They are willing to accept the immediate, localized risk of military confrontation for the long-term goal of continental stability.
Okay, now group 2. Conditional support. This includes major players like Germany, particularly under Merz, and Canada. They're willing to help, but they have major reservations about physical deployment on Ukrainian soil.
Yeah, they're paralyzed by political caution.
It seems like it.
Germany and Canada represent the strategic middle ground, and it's defined by intense domestic political constraints. Germany, in particular, is navigating the complexities of its Zeitenwende, that major shift in defense policy.
Right.
Their leaders recognize the strategic necessity of the MFU, but the political cost of sending German soldiers into a conflict zone on Ukraine's side, risking combat death, is almost unthinkable domestically.
So their internal politics dictates their foreign policy on this one?
Largely, yes. Their preference, therefore, is for non-contact deployment.
What does that mean?
They are willing to provide logistics, intelligence support, training, and extensive medical aid, all the necessary infrastructure for the MFU, but they want their troops stationed safely in neighboring countries like Poland or Romania.
So they want to contribute heavily to the deterrent effect without standing on the pitch themselves.
You could say that. They provide the spine, but not the skin.
They want to support the referee, but they don't want to stand on the field where the ball or the missile might hit them.
That's a good way to put it.
And Canada, given its historical role as a great middle power often focused on peacekeeping, likely feels similar political pressure to support the effort without accepting the massive escalation risk of placing soldiers in Lviv.
That's the strategic calculation. It's a way to contribute substantially without signing up for the tripwire risk that we'll discuss shortly. It's a contribution based on capability rather than direct confrontation.
Which leads us to group 3, categoric no. This includes Italy, Poland, and Finland. And their reasoning is fundamentally different. They aren't worried about political optics.
No.
They're worried about immediate existential retaliation.
Their fear is primal and existential, and it's tied directly to geography. Their argument is this: any European soldier killed on Ukrainian soil, regardless of whether they are monitoring or in combat, would immediately trigger a widening of the war.
They see the MFU not as a deterrent,
but as an active, centralized target, an invitation for Russia to test Europe's will.
I find the inclusion of Poland and Finland particularly important here. Why are the nations that border Russia, the ones who arguably have the most at stake in securing Ukraine, the most hesitant about MFU deployment in Ukraine?
It seems counterintuitive.
Wouldn't they want the maximum deterrent possible?
This is the core geopolitical paradox of Group 3. Poland and Finland are Russia's neighbors. They spend every day watching Russian military movements and intelligence gathering near their borders.
Right.
They believe that sending troops into Ukraine immediately turns them from NATO members providing support into direct belligerents in Moscow's eyes.
So they fear a strike on their MFU contingent would be followed by a strike on their own soil.
Yes, a direct attack on a NATO member, forcing Article 5, which they desperately want to avoid until they are absolutely certain of full U.S. backing.
So they are arguing that the tripwire strategy is too effective, it guarantees escalation, and they are the ones who would pay the first price if the tripwire is crossed, because they are geographically vulnerable.
Precisely. They are balancing the need for effective deterrence for Ukraine against the overwhelming immediate risk to their own national security.
And Italy.
Italy, which is geographically further removed, operates under a similar principle of risk minimization, often preferring diplomatic solutions and stability over confrontation. For them, stability today trumps deterrence tomorrow.
It's the ultimate cost-benefit analysis where the cost could be total regional collapse. And this is all complicated by the fact that the United States is serving as the backstop,
Right.
providing logistics and intelligence, but explicitly refusing to put U.S. boots on the ground in the MFU.
Europe is being asked to carry the full weight of the ground risk.
Exactly. And that position reinforces the idea that this is now primarily a European problem requiring a European solution. It forces European powers to mature their strategic thinking very, very rapidly.
Which leads directly to this MFU proposal.
We cannot talk about the MFU without talking about Russia's immediate and aggressive reaction, because they certainly weren't ambiguous about their stance.
Not at all. Moscow's reaction was swift and highly inflammatory, designed to intimidate any potential contributors to the MFU.
So they say.
Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, called the MFU an axis of war.
An axis of war.
And stated in no uncertain terms that any NATO-linked troops in Ukraine would be considered legitimate targets.
That is a direct, clear, and unambiguous threat of military action against MFU personnel, potentially using precision long-range strikes.
It is.
So why, in the face of such a clear threat, are France and the UK pushing this plan forward? The answer is the tripwire strategy, and it is one of the most high-stakes gambles in modern European history.
This strategy relies entirely on shifting Moscow's risk calculation. It's a form of political judo.
Okay, explain that.
The mechanism is designed to place a small but significant number of highly visible troops, say 5,000 or more French and British personnel, not on the front line, but in western Ukraine.
Right.
Imagine them stationed in large consolidated military hubs in Lviv, or even deeper west, far from the current line of contact.
Wait, if they're so far from the front line, how are they deterring anything? If Russia wants to test the ceasefire, they'll do it in the Donbas, not Lviv.
They deter by presence, not by engagement. The logic is simple but brutal.
Okay.
Russia is currently using precision missile strikes to destroy Ukrainian logistics and training centers in those western areas. However,
Yes.
Russia is less likely to launch a decisive large-scale missile strike on those western areas if they know for a fact that the target is shared with British or French citizens.
Because they would risk killing them.
Exactly. They would risk killing British or French citizens, immediately escalating the conflict beyond what Moscow currently desires, which is a war limited to Ukraine.
Ah, I see. By targeting a known logistics base in Lviv, they might wipe out a depot, but if they kill 50 British or French troops, they have immediately crossed a massive political and military threshold.
That's it.
That specific act would trigger overwhelming political pressure and demands for retaliation from London or Paris, even without Article 5.
Correct. The presence of those troops, those European flags, acts as the tripwire. If the wire is tripped, Article 5 is still technically not invoked because these troops are not operating under NATO command.
But the political consequences would be catastrophic for Moscow.
They would. The deployment is designed to make the cost of striking Western Ukraine politically unacceptable for Putin, thus keeping that crucial logistic and training lifeline open for Ukraine.
A massive gamble. We're essentially asking, will Putin blink if he sees a European flag on a base in Lviv?
That's the question.
Because the entire strategy hinges on the assumption that Russia doesn't want direct confrontation with a major European power right now, even if it's outside of the NATO structure.
Duh. And this is where the disagreement among the European nations is vital. Group 1 believes Putin will blink because he fears a direct fight with a nuclear power like France or the UK.
And Group 3?
Group 3 believes he won't blink, or that he will test the tripwire with a small, deniable strike, forcing the West into an impossible choice: massive retaliation or political humiliation.
So the MFU is not a guarantee of peace.
No, it is a guarantee of rapid, devastating escalation if the peace is broken. It is deterrence by maximum political risk.
It's the most high-stakes referee placement in history. They are putting diplomats in harm's way to force Russia to adhere to a ceasefire that hasn't even happened yet. That's staggering forward thinking.
It is.
This moves us into the broader geopolitical implications. This MFU plan feels like a dramatic acceleration of European strategic thinking. It's not just about Ukraine's safety anymore, is it?
Absolutely not.
It feels like the continent is finally taking control of its own defense.
We have to connect the MFU plan to the broader geopolitical implications. The entire debate is about self-preservation for Europe.
So self-preservation.
This is a continental recognition that the post-Cold War security architecture built on the assumption of U.S. commitment is fundamentally broken.
And Europe needs to take control of its own fate.
Yes, regardless of political outcomes in Washington.
And the elephant in the room driving this urgency is, of course, the geopolitical context involving the United States, the isolationist shift.
Precisely. We are operating under the context of the U.S. isolationist shift, particularly under the current administration, but also reflecting a broader trend in U.S. foreign policy fatigue.
And the implication is stark.
Very. Europe feels it must prove it can defend its own backyard if the U.S. continues to pull back its global influence, or if future administrations become overtly hostile to the NATO structure. This isn't just rhetoric. This translates into immediate European policy changes.
How does that shift translate into policy? We hear about isolationism, but what's the practical consequence on the ground?
It translates directly into budget lines and defense procurement. European nations, particularly France and Germany, are suddenly boosting defense spending at rates unseen since the Cold War.
Okay.
They are moving away from relying on U.S. equipment and are signing massive bilateral and multilateral contracts for pan-European air defense systems, drone production facilities, and long-range fires.
So Europe is hedging its bets.
Building a security spine that can stand independently, the MFU is merely the tactical manifestation of this larger strategic move toward autonomy.
So if the security guarantee is shaky in Washington, Europe has to build its own regional security spine, and the MFU is the first major physical sign of that new spine being tested on the frontier.
And this MFU is Europe's attempt to show what analysts are calling human-level cognition in its foreign policy.
Okay.
It's a commitment to long-term stability over short-term political comfort.
Okay, that sounds like a phrase straight out of a complicated chart. Let's break down human-level cognition in this context. What does it mean for defense planning?
It means they're actively thinking ahead to the next decade of Russian aggression, not just reacting to the immediate crisis in Donetsk or Zaporizhia.
Right.
If System 1 is reacting to the immediate bombing raid, and System 2 is calculating a response over the next 2 years, human-level cognition is looking at the 2030 geopolitical landscape.
So they realize Russia will rebuild.
They realize Russia will rebuild. They realize they might have to defend this line indefinitely.
So it's a shift from being a dependent strategic partner, relying on U.S. technology and manpower, to becoming a truly autonomous geopolitical actor capable of complex, multi-layered planning.
Exactly. It's a deeply analytical strategy that anticipates Russia's 2-year rebuilding period and the subsequent threats in 2028 or 2029.
And they're planning for that now.
They are signing contracts for drone factories that won't deliver until 2029. They are investing heavily in terms of political risk and financial cost to stabilize their eastern border now, even if the peace treaty is years away.
The MFU is the physical manifestation of that?
Yes, of this proactive strategic depth. What's fascinating here is that it's a commitment to long-term regional stability, explicitly risking a short-term escalation.
They are making the calculation that the price of doing nothing,
waiting for Russia to fully rebuild,
is far greater than the price of deploying 10,000 troops today as a tripwire.
It's a preemptive defense mechanism. They are accepting the potential for conflict today to prevent the certainty of a larger, more destabilizing conflict tomorrow.
That's a fundamentally mature, if terrifying, strategic viewpoint.
It confirms that the European powers view this conflict as the central pivot of their security future. If they cannot manage this front line, the entire European project is vulnerable.
This entire deep dive has been defined by paradoxes. The situation is so complicated because the dynamics are contradictory.
They are.
Let's summarize the 2 key paradoxes facing you, the listener, right now, because they define the current state of the conflict.
The first paradox is the military one. The front line is frozen in movement. Territorial gains are negligible, measured in square miles, but it remains a daily, bloody, costly meat grinder.
Where personnel losses are counted in the hundreds of thousands.
It is stagnant carnage maintained at a terrifying human cost.
And the second paradox is the diplomatic one.
Right.
Despite this military stagnation and the recognition that a formal peace treaty is years away, diplomacy is moving at 100 miles an hour.
It really is.
To implement a complex, risky security guarantee, the MFU for a peace, based on the Cypriot or Korean model that may not arrive formally until 2028 or 2029.
We have a high-risk diplomatic innovation in the context of operational stagnation. That's the tightrope Europe is walking. They are attempting to achieve a geopolitical conclusion without a military resolution.
And that tightrope is held up by 10,000 to 30,000 non-combat troops acting as a potential political shield against future Russian aggression. High stakes indeed.
If we look at the immediate horizon, it seems like 2026 is the year we stop waiting for a miracle peace negotiation and start building a very difficult, very expensive safety net.
Yeah.
The energy is shifting from winning the war to managing the conclusion of the violence through credible and controversial deterrence.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you follow the news? It means understanding that the military phase may be stabilizing into this bloody equilibrium,
Mm-hmm.
but the political risk is spiking dramatically
Mm-hmm.
because Europe is accepting the enormous responsibility of the tripwire strategy. When you hear about the MFU in the news, you need to think of it not as a standard peacekeeping force,
No.
but as a political pressure valve designed to force Russia into compliance. It's an escalation mechanism dressed up as a monitoring mission.
Whether it's 15,000 troops or 30,000, the message from the UK and France is clear. The front line might be frozen, but the diplomacy required to keep it frozen is moving at 100 miles an hour.
And that speed brings its own risks.
The MFU is the new dividing line in Europe, both physically and politically.
And for a final provocative thought, think about this. Reflect on the difference between the Cypriot model of non-peace, backed by the MFU tripwire, and full Article 5 NATO membership.
Yeah.
The MFU requires Europe to risk its own citizens' lives to enforce a ceasefire, while NATO membership would require the entire alliance, including the US, to step in. Which one offers true long-term stability in the face of the Russian threat?
It's a huge question.
Is the MFU a permanent solution or just a sophisticated delay tactic that formalizes regional instability for the next generation?
So basically, it's not as complicated as it sounds. It just involves the risk of triggering the largest land war in Europe in 80 years to prevent a future conflict.
Those are you.
Hey.
But hey, we're out of time. If you learned something new today, tell a friend about us.
Thanks for listening to Learn English Easy.